Did you work out today? You should. It's good for you. Let me get a shirt on and we'll talk about this 51.2. All right, much better. What's up? Welcome back to a fresh new video. Today we're talking about the Sony 50mm 1.2 lens. And this is not gonna be a traditional review. I'm not gonna tell you about how much the lens weighs or what the front filter size is. I'm gonna tell you about why I bought it, why I use it, and why it's fit into a very particular spot in my kit in hopes that those reasons and those decisions help you out in some way. This video is not sponsored by Sony, though it should be because I have nothing but great things to say about this lens. But I guess Sony doesn't hook up tiny channels like mine. So let's see if we can get this video 150 likes and tell Sony, hey, hook them up. Let's get some Sony stuff, sponsored stuff on this channel. I've had this lens for a little bit over a month. I've had the chance to shoot with it pretty heavily for some professional video work as well as some personal photo stuff. And with a lot of experience with the lens in a short amount of time, I finally have a couple of reasons as to why it's permanently staying in my kit. All right, so one more small piece of context when it comes to what we're gonna be talking about with this lens is that my main lens, you all know this, those of you who've been following this channel, my main video lens is the 16-35 f2.8 G Master lens. Fantastic lens, workhorse, gets the majority of my shots, especially with video, but you are lacking some creative style shots. So it's good to be able to pair that with a more telephoto style or just a tighter prime lens, a little bit faster. That used to be my Zeiss Batis 85 f1.8. But now that creative lens, that prime lens is gonna be this 51.2. So a lot of what I talk about in regards to why I'm gonna be choosing this, and it's gonna be filling that very special spot in the kit of that prime creative lens that couples really well with a wider zoom. I'm gonna be talking about some areas that this fell short for me and where this is gonna be filling that space. All right, now the main reason why this lens is taking over that slot is because it's an f1.2. Ultra creative at 1.2 versus the Batis 1.8, a little bit less bokeh, a little bit less aperture bokeh, but the nice thing about the 1.8 is you get a little bit more compression because it's an 85, a little more compression bokeh out of that. So I would actually say the millimeter difference of 85 versus 50 versus the 1.8 versus the 1.2, the bokeh that I'm getting is very similar, though I do prefer the 1.2 out of the 50. It's just a little bit more buttery, it's a little bit better separation, and I like the creativity that I have with the 1.2. Which brings me into my next point. Outside of the creativity I get with 1.2, it's also more versatile because I can obviously bring that up to f1.8, f2, f2.8 if I want to make sure that I don't have such a narrow aspect of focus, but I have the ability to drop to f1.2 if I want that style of shot. Like you can see some of these here, these are shot at f1.2, but I also have the ability in ultra low light if I need to be shooting at 1.2 for a specific situation and I want that exposure flexibility when I'm in a low light situation. And taking a look at this shot here, for example, I was at f1.2, that was a mistake. I really wanted there to be a shot of focus on the eye with heavy bokeh in the background for this one. I probably should have been closer to f2 because you can see that I was a lot more focused on the nose. And the next big reason for me in this decision was that it's an incredibly fast and accurate and silent autofocus. If I'm messing with f1.2, I need to make sure that that autofocus can keep up. That shot that I was talking about a second ago was my mistake, but typically having a 1.2, I need the autofocus to be able to keep up with the action because I don't have that big of a margin for error if I'm missing focus. And that's not to say that the focus on the 85 1.8 isn't fast, because it absolutely is. But for example, if this 1.2 produced these beautiful images like it does, but let's say that the autofocus was either loud like the G Master 85 is, or if it was slow or inaccurate, then I would not have got this lens. Like those things are critically important, and the 85 1.8 would have stayed in the kit. But because I have that 1.2 versatility as well as the creativity, and the autofocus keeps up and is dead silent, ridiculously fast and accurate, that's a big reason as to why this thing is making the leap. The next big one for me is just overall image quality. A lot of the reviews on YouTube are saying the same thing, and I would fully agree that this lens is ridiculously sharp. The contrast is beautiful, the way it renders colors and skin tones, it's just on point. Not to say that the 85 Batis isn't amazing, but this thing just has the edge, and there's something about it that every single time I look at the image, it has that little bit of extra character, and for that creative lens in my kit, that's a really important aspect. Next point is simply just focal length, 50 versus 85. I like 85 better for portrait style stuff. I think it is a little bit more flattering for the human face, but the 50 is still really nice. And this is gonna be different for everybody. This is very specific and unique to me, but I find myself constantly shooting in a little bit more tight of spaces. A lot of gym stuff, a lot of fitness stuff, and 85 is pretty limiting if you don't have a lot of space, and you almost don't even use it as often because you can't get the shots that you need. 50 being just slightly wider, but still having that telephoto style feel to it and having good compression, especially with the 1.2, it allows me to have a little bit more flexibility when I'm in smaller spaces. And my last major reason for going with this lens is the minimum focusing distance. It's not a macro by any means, but it's a lot closer than the 85 1.8. And what I like about that is that the combination of the 50mm with the 1.2 with the close focusing distance, you can get these semi kind of macro style shots. I'll play some of these clips again that you've already seen. But these shots are a nice creative tool. And I like having that ability to get kind of tight in that macro style feel. I always struggle with that with the 85. You can get relatively close, and it's an 85, so it's gonna punch in a little bit further in general, but I never really got those exact macro style shots that I wanted without going with a full-on macro style lens. And there's definitely some Sony primes out there like the 21.8, which has the ability to focus ridiculously close, but I always found that with like a wider lens and a close focusing distance, I never liked the image, and especially if you're getting like a tight shot of somebody's eye, especially like a person, getting that close to them with such a wide lens is just kind of an awkward situation. So the 51.2 is that really nice middle ground for me, that macro style stuff, close focusing distance with a ton of separation off of the background. That being said, no lens is perfect, and there's a few cons about this lens that I can totally deal with and that aren't a big deal to me and have clearly not been a factor to pull me away from putting this lens in my kit. The first one is that there is a pretty heavy amount of focus breathing. I don't see that as a huge deal unless you're doing a tremendous amount of manual focus really quickly and your focus changes are in your scene and you're seeing some of that focus breathing. It will still breathe with some autofocus, obviously, but what I found is like the B-roll style stuff that I shoot, the creative stuff that I shoot, I'm not concerned about the focus breathing. They're typically pretty tight or relatively fast shots anyways. The only time that's gonna be an issue for me is when I'm shooting like an interview style shot of somebody and you can see some of that focus breathing or the pulsing. But what I've found, and I'll link a video up here, is that's a lot more so a problem with your autofocus settings, and that can be mitigated by making some quick switches. Check that video out if you're having problems with your Sony cameras with some of that pulsing. And the last con, and this was probably the hardest one for me to make a decision about, look, this 85 1.8 is image stabilized in the lens. That paired with the image stabilization in the A7S III, for example, really nice combination for some handheld work. This is not image stabilized. That probably would have made it a perfect lens, but it's not image stabilized. But what I've found is that shooting with what I normally shoot with it is I'm typically shooting 120p anyways. And I usually have it rigged out to where it's fairly heavy, which is actually a point, is the heavier that the camera is gonna be, the more stable you can get handheld shots anyway. This is pretty light and small where that OSS, the image stabilization, helps out a lot. This is a lot heavier, so it is gonna weigh it down a little bit. It's not perfect. You still could get some shakes, especially if you're doing like handheld 24 or 30. But for me, wasn't a huge deal because a lot of the stuff that I'm shooting with this is in 120p. And that slow motion footage typically looks really smooth, and I'm not super concerned about not having image stability in the lens. McKinnon used to say that his 85 1.4 was the king of B-roll. This was like 3 or 4 years ago. I followed suit, and this 85 1.8 was my king of B-roll. Very similar to the lens he was talking about where it's image stabilized. It's an 85, difference was 1.8 versus 1.4. This was the king of B-roll for me, but This is gonna be the new king of B-roll and all of the slow motion B-roll style stuff. Well, most of it. I still shoot some B-roll with the 16-35, obviously, but most of that on this channel is gonna be shot on the 50 1.2. But hey, that's gonna do it for me. My name is Sean DeWispeler. This channel is all about the skills behind the art of creativity, photography, videography, gear reviews, tutorials. Me being full-time in the fitness industry, it's always gonna have just a little bit of a fitness feel to it. So if any of that sounds like something that you're into, hit the subscribe button down below. Let me know in the comments what lens you're using for B-roll, if you tried the 50-1.2, if you can't wait to get your hands on it, and I'll look forward to seeing you in the next video. Oh, on that point, I got something really interesting for the next one. Something I haven't done on this channel yet, something that a lot of you have asked for. And if you're watching my IG, you probably already know what's coming. But all right, take care. See you.